Ooh, shouting and echoing. Got. Good afternoon and welcome to this meeting of the Place Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I'd like to inform those present that this meeting is being webcast live and will be capable of repeated viewing. So we do have a couple of substitutes in attendance today, I think. Councillor Shanks?
I'm subbing for Councillor Sykes.
Thank you. Councillor Earthy?
Hello, yeah, Councillor Earthy subbing for Councillor Fishley, thank you.
Thank you. And Michael?
Michael Creedy for Alder People's Council.
Thank you. Do any members wish to declare any interest in relation to any matters included on the agenda? Councillor Cattell.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm a member of the Seafront Development Board, and I don't know how that works in terms of whether I can say anything or not.
I'm sure you can. Yeah, it's fine. Thank you. Did you have your hand up then, Councillor? Oh, okay, waving at someone else. Fine, thank you. So there are no Part 2 items today, so the press and public won't be excluded. Oh, I'd also like to say that online we have, I think, some youth council reps who will be joining officially from May, but are in attendance just on YouTube, on the live feed, to get a feel for the committees between now and then, when they'll be deciding which of them will be on which committee. So welcome if you're out there. So we have 3 sets of minutes to approve today. Do members approve the draft minutes, first of all, from the special budget meeting on the 19th of January as a correct record of that meeting? Thank you. Do you also approve the draft minutes from the 21st of January as a correct record of that meeting? Mark.
I'm trying to find the reference, but there's an "and" under my name, and I'm trying to find it, which was wrong or misleading.
Which set of minutes? Sorry, I've moved on then. Was it the first one?
It was the still. It was the paragraph 58.3 of the one on Sill, the item on Sill. It's only a very small one. And it just says, technically, infrastructure such as revenue-based proposals, like I said, and so on and so on, because they're not revenue-based. It was just a very small error.
Okay, thank you. Was that in the first minute?
Yeah, the first one, not the budget one, the other one.
Oh, yeah, okay, thank you. So do members otherwise agree about those minutes? Agree? Thank you. Do members also finally approve the draft minutes from the second special budget meeting on the 19th of February as a correct record of the meeting? No one saying anything. Agreed? Thank you. So today we are looking at 3 reports, and we'll end with a discussion on our next topic for the Task and Finish group. We'll start with an update on the recommendations from our first Task and Finish group that was on short-term lets. The recommendations were approved by Cabinet in June of last year, although some were dependent on actions having been taken by central government before they can progress. We're going to change the order of the agenda at this point to accommodate Councillor Taylor, who is with us online. We'll be taking the Seafront Development Board prospectus after the short-term lets report, which is being developed to present a unified vision of the seafront and attract investment. The prospectus belongs to the Seafront Development Board, and they will be seeking an endorsement from Cabinet. We're being asked to note the report. Our final presentation is looking at the memorials policy that aims to assist anyone considering installing a memorial on council-owned land in the city. It explains the different options, timescales, and the application process. We're being asked to note the report. We will then end with a discussion on our next task and finish group topic. In the interest of time, can I please request that both those asking and answering questions are as brief and to the point as possible, as we want everyone who wishes to contribute to have the opportunity to do so. We don't want the meeting to overrun too much into the evening, and I'm going to ask those presenting to keep their introductions as brief as possible to allow as much time as we can for questions. Thank you. So there's no public involvement, there are no member questions, so we'll go straight into the update on the short-term Let's report recommendations, and we're joined by Councillor Taylor, Cabinet Member for Finance and City Regeneration, and Nicola Hurley, Head of Planning, who's here in person, and with, as I said, Jacob online. Councillor Taylor, please can you give us a brief summary of the paper?
Sure, yeah, and I will try to keep it brief. Thank you, Chair, and thank you everyone in the committee for bringing this item back. As the Chair has mentioned, obviously the background was there was a task and finish group from your committee that made a number of recommendations that we accepted and took to Cabinet and passed. And this is a brief update on those recommendations. There's a slide deck attached as an appendix to this report item. And broadly speaking, you could sort of bunch the recommendations into maybe three categories. One is lobbying, inputting and encouraging national government action on this issue, which is largely about a licensing and registration scheme for short-term lets. And in the update, we note that we have been lobbying on that, and indeed we are in discussion with government on exactly that. And the government is developing an online platform to facilitate that, and we made it clear to government that we want to be part of that, and we would look to be part of that as soon as possible. But I understand it may also become mandatory at some point anyway. But we think it's good to be involved in sort of shaping it and being involved in it. Then there were some recommendations that were sort of more narrowly about things we could do now, which were sort of more around information and dedicated officer supporting. And that work is ongoing. And Nicola may want to just give the latest in terms of where that stands in terms of information and officer. And then the final sort of category I would talk about is planning policy. And there were a number of recommendations for consideration in our overall planning policy, which is good timing, because most of that would come within City Plan, which is the overall planning policy document for us as a local authority in a city, within which there are lots of policies underneath. The thing to update their members on, which links to that other subject, is that there have been changes in plan making process. So the government have published new guidance, new directive on how city plans or local plans can be drafted. There are some changes within that. There are some changes in things that we can influence locally, and there are some things that are more deferred to national, but they also bring the timeline in, which actually for this purpose is a good thing, because it means that we can kick off the process of formally consulting on a new plan, and we can get that wrapped up and hopefully published and then approved by the national body within 30 months, which I know still seems like a long time, but it is quicker than previous plan making processes. So the update really in the deck is that yes, the things that were recommended are indeed being considered, and the underlying studies. So there's a visitor accommodation study that would then be the evidence and basis for any policy in the plan that is ongoing. And the timeline for City Plan, as I say, will kick off this year, and we would hope to be done within 30 months. And that's all of the City Plan, but obviously inclusive of anything on short-term lets. So that's sort of high-level update, Chair, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Has Nicola got anything to add before I bring in questions?
Just to say on the city plan, visitor accommodation, short-term lets is something that we are allowed to look at, as Councillor Taylor said. And just to advise that we have recently commissioned a visitor accommodation study that will help inform the policies that then go into the plan document.
Okay. before I take some of the hands that are going up, can I just ask for a little bit more explanation for those who are confused about city plan, which is also something that comes regularly to this committee, as we've had a lot of meetings about, because in the update itself, it's described several times as city plan 2041, which makes it sound like none of these changes that might come in city plan will be here until 2041, which I know isn't the case, but can you just clarify that for people?
Yeah, I think we should actually change the name, and we're allowed to change the name under this new process. We can call it whatever we want, and happy to take views from committee what we should call it. But yeah, that would be the lifetime of the plan. So if we published it, if it ended up being fully signed off in, let's say, well, we're 26 now, in 28, it would be a plan that would in theory run from 28 to 41, but actually we can probably call it something better. It certainly does not mean that the policies would become effective in 41. They would become effective from the date that they passed the inspection process and came in as our local policies.
Thank you. Okay, so I think I saw Councillor De Oliveira's hand first, but and then I've got, I don't know who was first, Anne, and then Mark, and then Sue. So.
Thank you, Chair. I think on page 36, I think it's paragraph 3.4, it talks about the report and also lack of reliable information on the number of short-term lets operating in the city. So therefore, which sort of interim data gathering and enforcement measures are being put into place now, ward by warding, rather waiting for Whitehall's licensing scheme?
Well, I think it's a good question, and I will bring in Nicola. But one of the things that actually I think is not well, and I hadn't really understood until is we do enforce against improper short-term lets at the moment, and indeed. Brighton Hove News, I'm sure in the room, covered a story recently about someone that was using a property as a permanent short-term let, which is not correct. They need to therefore register that. But Nicola, do you want to come in on the enforcement that we can and indeed are able to do today?
Yes, so in planning terms, the use of a property as a short-term let may need planning permission. Some circumstances it doesn't need planning permission. It depends on the duration and the frequency of use. And basically, in planning enforcement terms, we can investigate the frequency and how often it's used, and if it's deemed to be a different use to a dwelling house, so it's been used so many times in a year and it's used constantly as a short-term let, then that's changed its use and we can enforce with that, and we have enforced against them.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great. What about the lack of reliable information, though? How are you monitoring that?
So what the government are proposing to do is introduce a licensing scheme. So the government have been looking at a number of options to look at short-term lets. One of them is a licensing scheme, and one is changing the use classes order in planning terms so that actually it's always a change of use with a short-term let. They're going down the licensing route where anybody operating a short-term let would have to have a license to cover it. So that would mean that there's much more reliable data around short-term lets because they would have to have a license to operate as one.
Yeah, I would add to that, Councillor Oliveira, because you weren't on this committee when we did the working group report, but I would add to that is half the problem with there not being a licensing scheme, is that there are, quite apart from planning use classes, there are many short-term let operators who are already in breach of current legislation in terms of the refuse services they use, the health and safety standards of their property, the fire regs, all of that kind of thing, not paying business rates. You know, they're in breach of all kinds of existing legislation, but councils can't enforce that legislation, and nor can the fire service or the police or anyone else, you know, environmental enforcement of any sort, if they don't know where those businesses are. So a licensing scheme would help enormously with that, just in knowing where they are, in fact. So, yeah. Right, so Councillor Meadows.
Thank you, Chair.
So on reading this document, I noticed it said to allocate a named officer with cabinet member oversight to have responsibility, and that's to be agreed for the end of February. Is that 26 or 27 is my first question. The second question is, planning policy team, as you talked about the visitor accommodation study, when is that due and will it be coming to scrutiny? Because this entire document is rests on the government giving permission for licensing. This whole document rests on that. So I'm just wondering, do we have a timeline, 26 or 27 April, say, to find out when that licensing is going to start? Because otherwise everything gets held up. So it's just a question.
Well, I think in terms of the named officer, that's still in discussions in terms of departments as to who's going to potentially operate the licensing. And we're having meetings at the moment to discuss where that would sit in terms of a licensing scheme and therefore be the named officer. In terms of city plan, and that's due to come back to scrutiny, I think September, with an update, which we would have the visitor accommodation findings by that point. So we are coming back to scrutiny on the development of the plan at some point, and we can share that with you then.
Thank you, Mark. Oh, sorry, Councillor Meadows.
Sorry, Chair. Timeline for all this entire document rests on the government saying, yes, you can have licensing registration.
Is there any further information? Because I know that you and various people, Nicola, have been in discussions with various government departments on all of this. And is there any clearer information about when the scheme, any of the schemes might start, and whether we might be part of the pilots on them?
So some of the latest discussions are saying that they're going to be doing a testing phase around late 2026, early 2027 is when government are looking to do that.
Thank you. Mark Shaw.
Thanks. Just a couple of questions. It's sort of following on from Councillor Oliveira's question about the idea about how many there might be or where they might be. But the visitor accommodation study, will that say things like, we think there are or there ought to be 1,000, 2,000, whatever short-term lets? Will there be a sort of estimation of what the capacity and the need for the city in terms of hotel rooms, B&Bs, that sort of thing in there? That's the first question. And the second question is, I can't resist obviously asking a question about the parking issues. There's a short-term let opposite me and they park willy-nilly everywhere. Because they're in suburbia, they tend to be gone before they're there, park on the pavements, they're unloading, they're loading. At the very least, I don't, this idea that maybe not having a specific permit, although I think there should be a slightly higher permit because it's a visitor rather than a residence permit. But could there be something, because there's another thing on information, could there be something on information for people who are then letting out short-term lets to have advice in their booking about this is where you should park, some sort of mandatory statement, this is where you should park. By the way, you can get a bus, you can walk around Brighton, it's a lot easier. Park your car up and you don't need to run around with your car all the time. Better still, don't bring a car at all. So something on travel planning in the advice note. And ideally, when the licence comes in, then it could be a mandatory part of that licence.
Well, Nicholas can come in, but my sense would be that actually the licensing would be quite key for that. So, I mean, yes, we can put a line to sort of any effects on public website, but I think it's the having the licensing or registration scheme, isn't it, that gives you the ability to actually have some teeth and actually know exactly who is actually registered and who needs to know about it. On the parking, I mean, obviously, if they're operating a short-term let, the people using that are not eligible for visitor parking, right? So they will not be using a residence permit because that's a whole process they have to apply for and takes ages. And nor is there such a thing as I've got a residence permit and I can just give it to someone to put it in their window because it's specific to car. What does obviously exist is visitor guest permits that all of the controlled zones have a certain amount they can apply for, and they're whatever price they are, £3, £4, £5. And in theory, those could be given to visitors to a short-term let, although, you know, that's up to the people that own the property whether they want to do that. I'm not sure whether there is really any merit in looking at specific parking implementation for short-term let users, because ultimately, yeah, they're visitors, same as hotel visitors, and they have to pay for parking, right? They have to either park in a multi-story or they have to pay for the cost of street parking, which in any case will be more than residence parking, right? Because a residence permit is less if you multiply it over the days in a year.
I have a memory that there was hotels could block book permits in that way that Councillor Taylor was just talking about, or was that long ago and I've forgotten it?
Yeah, they do. Some hotels can buy up front a set of effectively visitor permits, which they then can give, or perhaps in some cases sell on to their tenants. Yes, they can do that. That's right, Mark.
Councillor Shanks.
Thanks. I wasn't involved in this at the beginning, so presumably there is a reason why we can't just do this locally as a licence. But I mean, the bit of my ward, which is the North Lanes, you know, they're very bothered that it's not really, you know, it's a residential area and obviously lots of small businesses as well, but it's also becoming sort of de facto Airbnb land, and they do know where they are. I think one of the residents has been in touch with you, actually, Chair. He's got a huge list, so we do know. I think we do know where they are. I suppose the issue is the planning guidance only applying if it's all year, and you know, if we get this named officer, I mean, I just at the moment don't really know where to send that information, because there's information about whether people paying council tax or paying business rates, or so. You know, I think there is more we can probably do with our existing powers, but it's like, how do we make sure that's, you know, who to send that to? I mean, if that's not true, then if that was the whole conclusion that we can't do anything, but I know that there's, you know, we have refused some applications. It's come through planning, hasn't it? And then people appeal and they may get it or not.
Well, there's also
what else could we do now if we had an officer that we could say, okay, I know that number 5 Kensington whatever is an Airbnb, please investigate. But we probably need to have more staff powers. I mean, more people on the ground to do that.
So there's already short-term let web pages on the council's website which kind of advises what people can do now, and one of them is to raise, if there's concerns about noise, is to where to raise those concerns. And in terms of planning enforcement, if anyone's concerned about planning permission that may be required and hasn't been, or unauthorised works, they can complete the planning enforcement inquiry form. That will be potentially allocated to a officer in the planning enforcement team to investigate, and we do investigate potential breaches of changes of use for short-term lets. The difficulty is the enforcement team is a very small team within the planning department, so obviously it's limited as to how many they can do at the moment.
But just to say, the case that I mentioned earlier was indeed in North Lane. It was in Tidy Street. So yeah, just to be clear, we should you know, put this message out that if someone thinks that there was a residential property that is now a 365-day-a-year Airbnb or short-term let, please do report that to the enforcement team. As Nicola says, there is a small team and there is a backlog, but it will be investigated. And as I said, there's an active enforcement on Tidy Street, as is being reported in Brighton Hove News.
Yeah, I would add to that that is the problem is funding, isn't it? Is that without a licensing scheme, you are reliant on residents saying, I think this particular Airbnb is problematic, and then you fill in an enforcement form online, and then we get to it as soon as we can, or our officers get to it as soon as they can. But even then, it's probably still quite difficult. Like, we talked to Westminster Council when we were doing the report, and they have exponentially more resources than we do to spend on that, given that how much incredibly valuable property they've got in and how many tourists they've got in Westminster Borough. And so they've got way more enforcement officers than we have. But even there, they're like, how do you prove it often? If someone's running a business from what they claim is their home, you've got to have huge resources to put tabs on them, basically, to have undercover officers watching them or whatever, taking photos of how often it's used as an Airbnb. It's a very hard thing to do. So, yeah, a licensing scheme would definitely help. Councillor De Oliveira.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think the report says there is no specific quality, sustainability or health implications identified. And yet it also recognizes the concerns about house availability, community impact and safety standards. So why has no formal assessment been provided on those impacts?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is because the implications of the report are the implications of the decision being asked of committee. Committee is just being asked to note, so effectively there are no implications of the decision to note. If you look back at the Cabinet report where these recommendations were first considered and agreed, then there will have been a full equalities impact assessment done there because that was when the decision was made.
Yeah, and any future licensing scheme or plan will have, obviously, when it comes to decision, it will have equality impact and all the others. So, yeah, thank you. Any more questions on this one? Oh, Councillor Shanks.
Sorry, I thought I meant to ask this, but I don't think I phrased it properly. So the visitor accommodation study that you're doing, is that the existing visitor accommodation, so it's not covering I mean, I suppose that's the concern of areas like the North Lane. If you went and said, you'd say, well, actually, loads of visitor accommodation here, but it's not something that they want to have in that area. That's the issue. But are you just looking at what's officially visitor accommodation? You know, like, because I could go on Airbnb now and find there's hundreds of them in the city, aren't there? Apparently more than there are on Rightmove of actual letting.
So what the study is about, and same with all of City Plan, is that any policy we want to put into City Plan, I mean, we could dream up anything as a set of councillors, scrutiny, and obviously City Plan goes to full council. We could come up with anything that we think we want to do that would be good for the city. But the catch is, the only way we'd be able to get that through the plan making process is to have an evidence base that supports it. And so what we've got to build up, if we want to do anything in policy terms on short-term lets, is build up the evidence to say that the amount and usage of visitor accommodation is having a disproportionate effect on some other thing, which obviously is going to be the availability of housing for rental and for families, etc. It's obviously going to be, as you say, Councillor Shanks, in certain areas, massively changing the character of a neighbourhood. And so it's building up that evidence to then say, and therefore we're going to do this other thing in policy terms. It won't be necessarily about saying, oh, do we like hotels or do we like Airbnb, but it will be about building up the evidence base of what currently exists, but also factoring in, what's needed for the tourist economy, because as we know, we do have a big visitor economy in the city, and many shops, restaurants, businesses are relying on some level of visitors. But Nicola, is there anything you want to add to that?
I mean, I think in terms of the study, we've asked them to look at short-term lets as well as hotels and B&Bs. Obviously, they're going to have the same issues as what the Task and Finish group had, and that there's no definitive information out there. And whilst platforms advertise, that doesn't mean to say they're in use constantly. So has that tipped the balance in terms of a change of use under planning? So it's what we have to do when we're looking at them is kind of ask them to complete information and diaries as to whether they've tipped the balance into a change of use. So, but they are looking at those elements within the visitor economy study that we've commissioned, and that will help inform whether we do need to create zones where they can be or not zones, which is obviously part of the recommendations here, and will inform any policies that we have at the moment, whether they need to stay in terms of hotels, B&Bs and short-term lets. So that study will help us inform what we need to put in the plan.
Thank you. So are we happy as a committee to note the report? Thank you. So we will, thanks very much, Nicola and Jacob. And Jacob, you're back in the hot seat because we will move on to the seafront.
Cool.
And welcome back.
There's a set of slides. I don't know whether people want to look at the slides in the meeting, but obviously they're in the appendix. So just to give a short overview, as a reminder, as we discussed, we established a Seafront Development Board last year, which is made up of 3 councillors based on their portfolios, which is myself, Councillor Miller for Culture and Tourism, and Councillor Cattell for major projects, and then 9 other outside members with a really broad range of experience and perspectives across lots of different relevant industries, whether it's sort of leisure industry, development, retail industry, etc. And so that board was established last year, and that board was really set up to try and give some overview and strategic overview of the seafront as one asset, and really to try and direct and guide a strategic vision for the seafront and for the seafront of the future. We've said there on the slide sort of areas of focus, vision, strategic oversight, leading placemaking, thinking about infrastructure improvement, really importantly doing stakeholder engagement, which I'll talk about. Our ambition as a city to be a zero carbon economy, and then also ambassadors for the seafront. If we go to the next slide, we held a consultation event earlier this year, which was really well attended. It sold out within a couple of days of us advertising it. So we had 100 people in the Brighton Centre, and that was an initial conversation, and indeed feeding into a survey that is now live and continues to be live till the end of April, which is a bit different to normal consultations, and it's much more high level and open survey, which really asks things like, how do you use the seafront at the moment? What works well and what do you like about the seafront? What things need improving and would you like to see? And then sort of finally, what are the big ambitious things you might like to see on our seafront? And we're doing that consultation, and part of the reason of bringing it to scrutiny today, because the Seafront Board and the council intends to publish a seafront prospectus. And if we go to the next slide, the purpose of that prospectus is really to set out 2 things. It's to set out a shared strategic vision and ambition for our seafront. I know it's hyperbole, but I sort of genuinely believe it. I think we've got one of the better seafronts in England at the moment, but I genuinely think there's various pieces in the jigsaw of our seafront that could mean that in 10 years, we genuinely have the most spectacular seafront in England, the best seafront in England that has, things that other places don't have, and a set of assets and attractions that make it genuinely unique and exciting. I think we do have a chance to do that, and I think the decisions that we make, and hopefully the funding that we're able to attract in the coming 2, 3, 4 years is going to make a massive difference on the 10 to 20 to 30 year vision of what our seafront is. So the prospectus is about setting out a vision and an ambition for the seafront, and then it's also about setting out specific sites and possible developments to then get investors interested. And I don't just mean private sector investors, I mean funders, I mean trusts, I mean arts institutions, and I mean government, because we think that, as I say, there's some really key sites that are coming up that are going to be massively important for both the seafront in itself, but also for economic development and regeneration of the city as a whole. If we go to the next slide, this just sort of sets out what the seafront prospectus is going to be, as I've said, which is, it'll have a forward from, the chair and maybe the leader of the council that will set out the high level ambition of the city, then it'll have a vision for the seafront, what we want the seafront to be. Then it will talk about some of the overall strategy, and then importantly, it will set out some of the sites that we know are going to be in scope for interesting future phases. And then that sort of takes us nicely to the last slide, which, you know, people in the committee will be broadly aware of what the things that are being considered. But obviously, we know that Madeira Terrace, we're doing a chunk of it now as the first phase of renovation, but we know that the future phases are both a big challenge, but also potentially a big opportunity in terms of getting funding and potentially getting commercialisation in there, or beyond commercialisation, actual activity and reasons for people to visit that long stretch of arches. Blackrock is now a site that is ready to go and ready to be developed. We have some really exciting interim uses this summer, including No Fit State Circus as part of Brighton Festival is going to be located on Blackrock for part of the summer, and then a fan zone for the World Cup is going to be there for part of the summer. Then we have further phases of the seafront arches that we know need renovating, but also that provides opportunity. King Alfred, we kind of know where we are on King Alfred, which is that there's a live planning application, leisure element of King Alfred, but there will be a future, probably housing-led development of the remainder of the site in King Alfred. Poole Valley is interesting, given Valley Gardens 3, and then also obviously the very tragic fire at the hotel, but reimagining that area. We also mentioned Station to the Sea, and I think that should be in the prospectus, because whilst that is not just the seafront, that is our gateway to the seafront. That is where, you know, a big chunk of our day visitors come into Brighton Station and they stream down Queen's Road to the sea. So I think we should think about that as part of our seafront. And then we think about obviously the active travel schemes. And then we've also noted that those are some of the big things that we know we need to unlock. But in doing that, there are smaller things that we think are really important. And we think that we should try to be thinking about the seafront as one stretch from Saltdean through to Portslade. And what are the bits that we've got in certain places, or the bits that we might want to add? Are there areas where actually you might want some more cafes and food and bev? Are there some areas where you need some more play facilities for children? By the way, there's some areas that need some more sports facilities, or by the way, something that come out really strongly in the consultation event, accessibility. So we know in the east of our seafront, we now have the boardwalk, which has been, we hear from disabled residents, transformational for disabled and wheelchair users being able to actually access the beach in the east of the city. Should we be looking to do more of that in the west of the city? And so the document is not going to set out all of the answers, but it will set out a strategic vision and ambition and a set of sites that we need to work towards as a city that we can then take to government, to investment forums, to national trusts and funders to generate some excitement and then hopefully some money to the city to better achieve all those things. So happy to pause there and very keen to get both questions, but also input and ideas on the seafront as a whole and what might be in the prospectus.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor, and my apologies to Max. I should have introduced you properly. We also have with us Max Wood, the Director of Place. And I just said, oh, and here's Max. So Councillor Earthy and Councillor Mackie and then Councillor De Oliveira. Everyone else. So who did I say first? Councillor Earthy.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I'm glad you added that last bit about the total extent of Brighton seafront, because on the slide up there you had the furthest east was Blackrock, and of course from our way the Undercliff, which contributes an enormous amount to active transport and whatever, carries on for another 3 miles. So I just wonder if that's going to feature in the plan somewhere, because all we basically need is some tender loving care. The main problem we have is being filled up with shingle from storms. And so I think at the moment we are relying on volunteers of a, shall we say, more senior age group out there with wheelbarrows and shovels and brooms trying to keep the shingle off the Undercliff to actually make it navigable by pedestrians and cyclists. So if possible, is there any room in the budget just to get a little bit of kind of mechanical clearing devices, bulldozers or whatever you use to get shingle up? Because it's very important that that undercliff is not neglected, as I say, because of its major contribution to active transport. Thank you.
Well, yes, and as Councillor Earthy knows, she doesn't have to remind me that the seafront stretches into the east in the Deans, given that's where I grew up. And we had a question at the consultation event, which is your favourite bit of the seafront? And I love all the bits in between the piers and the Western Promenade and Hove Promenade, but actually my favourite bit of the seafront is the underground and the stretch to the Deans, and particularly the entrance at Rottingdean. So it's a really important bit of the seafront and will absolutely be part of the plan. As you say, there's unlikely to be big developments on east of the marina, although there may be smaller things that might be interesting. There might be smaller sports facilities or cafes that could be unlocked. But to your point, yeah, a key thing that already came through in the consultation and survey is that people are excited by the big developments, whether it's Blackrock or whether it's future phases of the terraces, but they also want us to get the basics right on maintenance, and that's both on built infrastructure like railing, shelters and benches, which we are working for through this year, and we're going to see some improvements this year, but also, as you say, the sort of the basics of keeping pebbles and shingles off. It's tricky because that's obviously revenue budget, and that's the bit the council does struggle with, is we're not awash with revenue funds to have sweeping and cleaning, but we can certainly take it away, Mark, and speak to the seafront team, the city ops team about sort of shingle clearance in the eastern section.
Thank you. Councillor Mackie.
Thank you, Chair. The residents east of the Palace Pier are just wholly, absolutely on board with this and the development of the seafront. Absolutely. But one thing that I keep getting is, how are we going to ameliorate, whilst there is new constructions going on, accessibility for people who are frail or elderly, or people who are wheelchair users, or people with disabilities? I'm just wondering what the contingency plans are within that.
Well, I mean, one key thing is obviously the new lift on Madeira Terrace, which I think the latest is hopefully it will be done by the end of this year. Obviously, at that point, a whole new stretch of seafront will become accessible from the coast road above. And obviously, the overall east of the seafront, you've got your sort of two main entrances, which are by the Palace Pier, and then the Duke's Mound ramp that you can drive down, and obviously there's lots of parking there. I think we'd obviously have to defer to the transport team, but as and when there are developments, it will be really important to maintain some parking spaces to allow disability parking, or those with disabilities to be able to park and get down there. So I think that's an important part of it, Councillor Mackie, and yes, looking forward to the lift as well, that will sort of increase the access to that stretch of the seafront.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got Councillor De Oliveira left next.
Thank you, Chair. My question is really about democratic accountability in investor-led regeneration. So the report says the prospects intended to support partners and the strategic investment decisions, and that the Seafront Development Board is an independent advisory board to Cabinet. What democratic safeguards will ensure the seafront shaped by residents rather than investors' priorities? And how will scrutiny members be able to test decisions before schemes are effectively done or locked in?
Yeah, so really important question. So we have to be absolutely clear that the Seafront Development Board cannot make council decisions. It is unable to make any decisions that are reserved for council decision making. In fact, it can't really make any decisions beyond that either. Obviously, individual members have things that they're involved in. What the Seafront Board can do is set out vision, it can set out recommendations, It can draw on the very significant experience of people on it who, people from historic England who know lots about heritage, and it can make recommendations to council. Then council decision making kicks in. So if it's a decision that has to be made by cabinet, then it's made by cabinet. It's subject to pre-decision scrutiny if we choose to do that, or it could be called in, and then obviously decisions that meet the threshold of full council go to full council, and everyone has to vote on it. And obviously within that, the cabinet decisions are then subject to both member questions, member deputations, public questions, and public petitions, etc. So just to be clear, there cannot be any decisions made by the board. Only council can make council decisions. But we think it's a really important, and has been a really important board to bring in that level of outside experience, ideas, and vision.
Obviously, there's a role of the planning committee in deciding, what can be built where. There's obviously democratic oversight through the planning process.
Thank you both. Michael Creedy.
Thank you, Chair. There's a couple of points I wanted to make. One of which is if you're standing at either Hove or Brighton train station, it's not particularly obvious where exactly the seafront is. I've heard tales of people actually getting taxis just for the few yards down to the beach. It might be an idea to open blue sky thinking, consider the possibility of a circular bus route, which would take in Blackrock, Hove, and then come back up to Hove Station and Brighton Station. Second point that I wanted to make was we're talking about putting a lot more events on the beach, and the need for either permanent or temporary toilets to service that is going to be something which is only going to increase. And thirdly, I wanted to say Brighton and Hove, the seafront plays a part in a bigger picture, which is the Sussex Bay project, which clearly is of great financial benefit to the whole of Sussex, not just Brighton and Hove. And it's always going to be useful to keep in mind that bigger picture, which we can contribute to. Thank you.
So thank you for that, Michael. And I actually completely agree with you on the transport point. I think it's a great idea, by the way, in terms of a circular loop bus. And I think it talks to a very important point, which is as and when we have something more permanent at Blackrock, which is still a number of years away, we are going to have to get that transport piece right, which is obviously, yes, there are buses that go along the top part of the coast road, and then you could get down, but you're probably going to need to improve transport. I also agree with you that as you come out of the station, that's sort of the idea that's been talked about for a little while about station to the sea, which is the front of Brighton station for many, many visitors, because obviously most will come to Brighton as opposed to direct to Hove station as visitors. That is your welcome to the city, and it hasn't always looked perfect and immaculate, let's say. But I think beyond that, there's also something about you want to be able to, have it as a welcome or a boulevard down to the sea. And so, I've got in mind that yes, could you have more planting? Could you have more welcoming footpaths? Could you have an arch maybe that says, this way to the sea, etc. But I think you're right. That is how we should be thinking about welcoming people. And yeah, the transport bit's really important. Toilets, yeah, obviously there have been some toilets reopened on the seafront, which is seafront. But obviously, local government boundaries are in some sense artificial, aren't they? Including the one that goes through the middle of Saltdean. In reality, the Sussex coast is one coastline, but it's absolutely, Michael, part of that overall Sussex picture. And by the way, we know it already exists, and we want it to be that Brighton seafront is an attraction for everybody in Sussex who want to come to the seafront. And again, that draws out the coastal transport bit. I'm always disappointed there's not a bus that goes right from east to west along the coast road. And I'd encourage the bus company to think about that, because I think that would be great for visitors and residents alike.
Thank you. Councillor Meadows.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, you talk about the consultation, and I keep harping on about where are these consultations and why aren't councillors ever told that these consultations are somewhere on our website. Hopefully someone will tell me where, because then we could advertise them so you could get more people responding. The structure of the seafront prospectus, the diagram that you showed, looks quite exciting, but will it be free for residents is my concern. Looks like you're going to capitalise on all the major areas, and these attractions will be there for those wealthier residents, but not for all local residents, and that concerns me a little. So is it just capitalising on the area, or will there be free bits for our local residents?
So first question, an email was sent on the 19th of January from Brighton Hove City Council, which advertised to all councillors, that advertised both the seafront event and the survey. So people were certainly made aware. Council officially obviously read it because she came to the event, as did a number of other councillors across 3 different parties. So we definitely have already shared that, but thank you for the offer of passing it on to residents, and we definitely want that to promote it. Second question, absolutely not. Brighton Hove Seafront, one of the reasons the seafront is so important, it is largely a free attraction for residents and visitors alike. And that's why obviously the seaside holiday was so popular, and still is popular with many people in Britain, because largely speaking, yes, you've got to buy some food and drink at some point, but the seafront is open and free to everybody, and that's the whole point. Now, are there ways to commercialise around that? Yes, I think there definitely are, in that can we get more potentially shops, art galleries, interesting attractions that of course there'll be an element of people paying for, but no, the seafront remains and will remain free and open to everybody, which is why it's such an important resource. So look, absolutely give that guarantee, and that won't be the nature of this prospectus at all, saying that we're going to hive off bits of the seafront that will be private. No, not at all, but there will be an important element of commercial attractions, retail, leisure, etc., that will help to make the seafront even better.
You never actually told me where I find this consultation.
It's on Your Voice, where all our consultations are, and as I said, the email came to all councillors, but I'm happy to forward it again for Councillor Meadows' benefit.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Shanks.
Thank you. I think it would be a good idea, following Michael's point about Hove, that Brighton Beach is always on the news, isn't it? So crowded, and people perhaps don't realise that if they came out the station and got on a bus, or even walked a bit further along, or if they waited and got out, if they came on a different one, came to Hove Station. So I think there's a bit more publicity needed there. I mean, my concern is really, particularly with the new beach park, which is great, but is like how we maintain things once we've got them, because the trees there, I don't know if people have been there, but they're dead. And I know I've gone on about that quite a lot, but they are. And so, we've got a lovely new park, but it's not really, it's just not very pleasant. And I think, we've had the same problem with Valley Gardens, in the sense that you build something, and then what you really need is some full-time maintenance to keep that looking as good as it was when it first, like the skate park looks great, except all the grass has gone around the edges of it. My other thing is about when we do this stuff, the paddle stuff down there, for example, and in other places along the seafront, those things are very well used. Why doesn't the council run this stuff itself? Why do we give it over to an operator who's making £36 an hour, renting out paddle, which is absolutely thronged from morning to dusk? And I think, yes, it's good to have private operators, but we could be more commercial ourselves in terms of how we run these things. I know I was done at the beginning in terms of development. Anyway, so I'd like to see us think about how we might use our, run these things ourselves. We'd have to get people who knew how to run them, obviously. But yeah, my main thing is in terms of maintenance, how do we ensure that when things are set up, that they stay as nice as they were on day one?
Who's taking that?
Well, I'll have a go and someone might come in. I mean, yes, there was a specific issue with trees. It was well covered that, a large number of trees that were obviously procured and then planted didn't survive and make it, which is obviously sad. And I know officers are sort of learning lessons that and talking to the contractor, etc. I wouldn't necessarily agree with what Councillor Shanks said that Hove Beach Park is done but doesn't look very attractive. I mean, I go there quite a lot. I think it does look quite attractive and has been quite a success. And as you say, the padel courts seem to be full morning, noon and night, as does the skate park and as do many other elements of it. So I think that's been quite successful. But the maintenance point, obviously, yes, remains, which is, the reality is, 30 or 40 years ago, when my dad worked in Brighton Borough Council Gardens department based out of Moulscombe Place and did mowing and gardening and pruning flowers, there were armies of people that worked for local authorities that did that kind of stuff. And I think Councillor Robbins did a similar job in Hove Borough Council. And yes, we're not in that position anymore, are we? That we don't have armies and armies of people maintaining gardens and beds. I think probably part of the answer, but officers might want to come in, is the type of planting that you do and the type of trees that you do that probably need to be less high maintenance in terms of schedules and that can largely survive and flourish just by rainwater and the way that the rainwater feeds in off banks, etc. Officers may want to come in. And then just lastly on padel, I think we do make money from some padel courts in that we have commercial operators, but we get some of the income from it. And obviously we have the overall leisure contract within which we're looking at padel courts at Withdean, aren't we? But we would get money from that. So we certainly do get money from it. But overall, we've made this decision to have most of our leisure facilities run by an operator, which is probably right for now, but can always be looked at. And then last thing is on commercial, I agree with you, Councillor Shanks, that the council does need to be more commercial and the council does need to bring in directly more of its own income, which is one of the reasons we've recently hired a new commercial director into the council who knows the city really well and has worked on the other side of the fence, but is now working on exactly that, bringing in commercial opportunities. But I think maybe Sam or Matt might want to come in.
With his hand up online. Do you want to come in?
I don't know, Sam might be making a similar point, but absolutely, as Councillor Taylor was saying, yeah, there's not an army of people who come and maintain these sites anymore. We did, but with Hove Beach Park, we did factor in maintenance afterwards, and people, there was for 3 years, there's people paid for out of that funding. I think, as Councillor Taylor also said, the challenge there is probably more about the specification of the type of tree and the location it's in, and obviously we've learned things from that. So there's something around right plants in the right place. But yeah, we do have to make sure we're kind of including that costing for maintenance in every project, going into the future.
Thank you. Sam, did you want to come in?
I think that all those key points have been covered off by Jacob and Max, but yeah, we're just to reassure that it's something we're really acutely aware of, the need to build in maintenance and ongoing costs into our capital budgets, but it is a challenge in the current revenue environment.
Thank you. We've got Councillor Cattell next.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this is just going back to something that Teresa asked about accessibility. I just wanted to let her know that we have one of the members of the board is himself a wheelchair user, and he actually, he was also a cricketer and a sports reporter and everything, and he runs a lot of he works with Pedal Power. And he's very, very cognizant of, very experienced in what it's like to be a disabled person in a wheelchair, and also about accessibility. So he was one of the people that I suggested we contact, because I know him through another, we sing in the same choir basically. So I just wanted to reassure you that we have got an expert on board for those things. So that's okay.
Thank you. Mark Strong.
Thanks. Just a few issues. I mean, yes, he was a rugby player, actually, I think, Alistair Hicknell, rather than a cricketer, or both, a bit of both, maybe. Yes, but I think he was an international English rugby union player as a sports person. But I think it's great to have that. But I think a concern from the voluntary sector is that these people are individually chosen to represent groups. There's no representation from community groups as such on that body. So they're individually selected. And a lot of them at least seem to be developer-led rather than local community-led. So I think our concern is the feedback loop. And in terms of the engagement event, it was oversubscribed, I couldn't get in. All we knew from community voluntary sector was that it was up there, it was just flagged through. We did know about it through Your Voice, but it wasn't directly advertised. So we knew that it was happening, but without much chance to have it, and just having one event isn't an ongoing relationship, and I think having some sort of more longer term ongoing relationship with local groups would be better. I mean, there is this, I hang on about it, but there is this Ornstein's ladder of engagement, which has co-engagement, which is higher up than just consultation. So consultation, just saying, we're doing this, do you like it, yes or no? Co-engagement, co-design is much more preferable. So if something could be done on that basis of having a bit more of a wider participation group, I think it would be really much more of a sales pitch to local community groups. And just in terms of a couple of other things about the active travel corridor was mentioned, but only as far as I can see the A259 going east. So I think we've talked about it before about going west along the seafront. And we're just wondering if it includes Marine Parade as well as Madeira Drive. So is the seafront only the lower element of the Kemptown end? Councillor Mackey might know more about this, but does it include the upper end? Because that's part of the seafront, even if it's up a cliff. And in terms of bus access, obviously that then does relate to what Mike previously said about the lower part, because the buses that do run all run along Marine Parade. There are no buses on the lower part. The new road that was built was supposed to be, or is designed to be, bus available. So that could be a link through to the marina. Manchester, for example, has a circular bus that runs for free just round tightly in the city centre. Maybe that's something for the new mayor or the new combined authority to look at. It would be in their remit. And the final one, though, I'm mentioning the marina. The shops are closing at the marina. The international, national chains, Iguanas and all those they're all closed. The marina is quite desolate. And the only shop that's there really is another multinational, which is Asda, which again, apparently Asda is in slight financial difficulty. So will the retail, that's Asda nationally, not that Asda. But we'll be looking at that because obviously we want, from a Chamber of Commerce point of view, we want to be looking at local businesses, trying to keep the money in a circular economy rather than just going out to multinationals. So it's those three things.
I mean, I think Max can probably tell us more about the marina because I don't believe that the council runs it at all. But and maybe Jacob can come in more on the consultation side of your comments.
Absolutely. Yes. So no, absolutely, the council doesn't own. Well, we own the freehold, but it's on kind of a complicated leasehold underneath. Obviously, the one of the landowners at the marina is on the Seafront Delivery Board, and I think what's really clear is that to help them make a case to invest more and really revitalise the marina is actually, they're really interested in the work that the Seafront Board is doing and what will happen at Black Rock and what will happen at Madeira Terrace and that kind of whole process of drawing people along that seafront and better tying the marina into the seafront, because I think at the moment it still feels like you get to the end of the seafront and it's kind of, the marina is almost like an edifice that people don't go to on foot and they go to on car, which obviously again is not what we want to encourage.
Thank you. Jacob, yeah, go on.
Just a couple of things. Yeah, I mean, I gently push back on Mark's suggestion that it's developer-led. Of the 9 people that are not councillors, 2 of them you could say are involved in the construction or development industry, but actually the rest of them are not. I mean, one of them's an award-winning gardener and knows about landscaping as an author on gardening. One of them is a expert in heritage, but nothing to do with development. One of them's a rugby player, as has been suggested, and a wheelchair user and campaigner on disability. One of them's a local business owner in Portslade that runs a yoga studio, but it's very connected to the seafront. One's an architect. So I don't agree it's developer-led, really. I think the balance is pretty good across lots of different industries that are relevant to the seafront. In terms of the engagement piece, well, look, I mean, yes, there can always be improvements to both the makeup of a body or indeed the way it engages. As a reminder, before we set it up, nothing existed, right? So we didn't have a board beforehand, and we didn't have an attempt to engage and then set a strategic direction for the seafront as a whole. So we're doing this anew, and I think it is net additive to the city and its possible progress. By the way, the board does do lots of other engagement as well, in that the chair and other members go to different groups. So I think, Steve Bassam's been to speak to the folks at the marina, the actual residents at the marina. I think there's been a visit to Hove Civic Forum. I speak about it at lots of different places. We're going to do some engagement at schools and colleges, one of the things we agreed at a recent board meeting. And we probably will do more events, Mark, and obviously the survey is open. And as always, any help that VCS can give us in helping to engage with people or possibly doing further events, we're very open to that. It's not a one and done thing. We've done one big one. I'm sorry you couldn't sign up. I obviously a big ticket and sold out the Brighton Centre. But we'll certainly look to do more, and happy to work with VCS on doing that.
Thank you. Councillor Miller, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I just wanted to respond a bit to the question about the marina, and they are very much wanting to work in partnership with us, and so they have paused development at the moment for us to come up with a strong plan and a direction of travel for Blackrock. So I think their main concern would have been to duplicate what we're doing, and instead they want to complement and work with us. So it is absolutely it is really, really on their radar and ours that this should not be a dying area of the city or a boundary. They've got some really interesting plans, but they need to know how to fit those in with what happens on Blackrock. But I think it could be a really exciting part of the city, ultimately.
Thank you.
Sorry, I mentioned the idea of extending what Mike said about the bus, but extending the bus, is that in something that they might be looking at? Sorry, having the bus going through that link, the Blackrock Tunnel Bridge link was built to take, I think it was built to take buses.
So the link was put in, using local enterprise partnership money to enable access both on foot and cycle, and like you say, potentially buses as well. That would in itself then be another investment. We'd have to kind of work out what the business case is for that, but we've enabled it to happen, so absolutely it can happen in the future.
Been on that, because I'm sure the Severn goes down to the marina.
It does.
Because I've been on it. It goes, yeah.
Lots of buses go into the marina.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to bring in some kind of big questions rather than focusing on whether we need a bus going on a particular route. So the first question is, how do we get from the vision to the reality within a time frame that people can actually work with? How do we identify what the funding limitations are that hold us back? And can we unlock the ideas that will enable us to move forward so that they actually become reality and can be implemented within a reasonable time frame, so that people absorb the positive sense of what they can contribute to? And then one thing that nobody's really talked about a lot is about how to extend our use of community and developing community along the coast as well, because sometimes people like to come and feel that they're part of that city community. That's why people come and go shopping in the North Lane, because they like to feel part of it and feel as if it's got a specific identity that they would like to join in with. So that might be able to be replicated on the seafront as well. And the shape of the city will inevitably need to change. We have to accept that we might need to draw more resource into the seafront and stop making these different sections of the city that are somehow separate from each other, but are filled with people and pleasure and enjoyment and ambition for culture to change and to become something else. And so it feels like we have loads of potential for success, but we need to be really positive and actually work together instead of talking about the terrible aspect of dead trees and parks that haven't quite worked out. We can fix that. We can do something about it, and we have to stay positive.
I mean, if I can come in, Chair, I totally agree with what Councillor Winder is saying, and Councillor Winder always is very good at actually raising our sights a bit to think about the big and the positive, and it's one of the reasons I'm so excited about this stuff versus some of the harder things I have to do as deputy leader doing the budget and schools and other things is this does really give us a chance to be aspirational. The first question is a really important bit, is how do you translate vision into actually delivering within a reasonable time frame? And that is the big question and the big challenge. My contention is that this prospectus document is a way of doing that, because it is not just a theoretical vision or fairy tale of what the seafront might be. It's trying to set the vision and then set out the steps and the individual opportunities to build the investment to actually achieve it. That's what we're trying to do, and that's really what the board is about as well. It's about not just going sort of site by site and saying, right, well, we need to think about doing something here, which might be, well, how do I do the next 10 arches? How do I find the couple of million quid to do the next arches? No, it's about thinking about that whole stretch of seafront, how it knits together and how one thing can lead to the other. Because if you take, for example, Blackrock, if we could unlock a development of Blackrock, I'd like it to be an arts-related development, perhaps performing arts, perhaps a modern art gallery. Well, then think about that. How does that fit in? First of all, it fits in what we just talked about with the marina, because, by the way, marina's got a big car park that isn't always full, and as Marcus said, it's got declining demand for the restaurant offer. If there's a big arts centre smack bang next to it, well, then those restaurants all of a sudden become much more attractive. Then you go across the east of the seafront, you think about, well, okay, the terraces then becomes really the gateway to this amazing facility of Blackrock. So it all links together, and the idea of the vision and prospectus is to set that out so that when we go to government, when we go to trusts, whether we go to charities or private investors for commercial bit, we say, look, this is not just something we're going to plonk in one place, and then, by the way, after a year after it opens, no one's going to go there. It sits within a totally revitalised, reinvigorated seafront. And I think we talk about the East a lot, and that's because I think the East are where the real big opportunities are. More into your point, people actually using and accessing the seafront. In reality, the eastern seafront isn't as well used and accessed as the bits between the piers or the western seafront, and we've got a real chance to unlock that. I think community use is really, really important, and I go back to the boardwalk, which again is not everything about the seafront has to be, I'm going to build a new, £10 million shiny thing that people come and pay to get in. Part of it is about just unlocking the space and making it available to communities. So the boardwalk, whether that was the complete intention or not, has unlocked a beautiful bit of the seafront for wheelchair users and disabled residents. So we've got to think about that. And I'm really interested in getting some disabled access down to the sea itself. How do we unlock bits that are basically making the seafront free and available for use for residents and communities? And that's why we also need to think about the seafront as one thing, because we've got such a large stretch of seafront, all of it's beautiful, all of it's got opportunities, but there need to be different bits in different places. Some of it will be more of a commercial offer, more of retail and a beverage. Some of it will be more sporting. Some of it maybe needs to be more thought about wellness. And there's a big part of people on the board who are interested in the East perhaps being more of a wellness and arts type vibe and hub versus in between the piers, which is more buzzy and commercial. So that's the sort of things we need to tease out and get into this document. But I very much agree with Maureen's sort of ambition and vision and positivity that we've got to bring.
Thank you. Councillor Goddard.
I too want to vocalise. I've listened a lot, but I also want to vocalise how exciting this is. It's positive. I think there are key phrases in the slide deck. I think my key phrase was this has to be about enriching everyday life for local communities. That this has to actually also not be a visitor bonus solely, but also a residence bonus. I also think, can we welcome this council into the modern age? This is very typically what a modern local council would do. You would reach out to your city to find expertise. You would harness volunteers that have particular skills. We might quibble about who's missing from the board. I think some heroes that have helped save the seafront should have perhaps been appointed, but that's not the issue. The issue is that this is attempting to be an open consultation about one of the jewels in this city. It's not about looking at bitty bits of development, but it's trying to take a holistic view of what could be a major asset for our children and our grandchildren. That's what this is about. And frankly, hearing Councillor Winder talk so positively, it is about people. It's about people and the people having a connection to the places that they live. So when Councillor Cattell talks about disability access, she's absolutely spot on, but we should also be thinking about access from those communities in East Brighton to those seafront riches. And that's what this has also got to be about. I also think there's a lot to learn in this for us as a local council and the future. I think the Business Growth Board could take a lot of lessons from this Seafront Development Board about leadership, about responsibility, about looking at our assets as economic development assets, as well as assets for pleasure and fun. So I'm really excited about this. I led a city centre task force in late 23, and the state of the city centre was appalling. It's better now. The concept of welcome is not apparent at Brighton Station. There really is no sense that you're arriving in a town that cares either about itself in many ways, or a town, a city that actually cares about its visitors or residents. It is appalling, that welcome. And if the station to the sea concept, and it was first raised in that city centre task force chair, can get anywhere, it's we need some big dreams and some big thinking and practical thinking, and perhaps getting the right trees around that kind of boulevard concept of the station to the sea. I love this seafront development prospectus. I love the ideas. I love the people that are involved. I think they've got so much to give, and we should actually say thank you to them for their time, and thank you to also Lord Bassam of Brighton for leading this development, and also Councillor Taylor and my colleagues that were involved in this. And too often, you know, we get bogged down in some of the detail and don't think big enough and bold enough about the ideas. So I'd like to see this flourish. I'd like us to prioritise some of the things that you've mentioned in that prospectus, but it is about enriching everyday life for local communities, both visitors and residents alike. Let's focus on that as a scrutiny committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Well said. Okay, so I don't think there wasn't much of a question there, was there, Councillor Taylor? So I think we'll just... Sorry? Yeah, I know. So I will just move on to Councillor De Oliveira.
Thank you, Chair. Let's not forget that the devil's in details, though. To get somewhere, you need to give the first step. You just don't parachute and jump there. One thing, though, is central outskirts areas of the city would need some sort of a development board as well. Sometimes it feels like a big divide in terms of the tales of two Brighton Hove who benefit. Nevertheless, my point is there is interesting tension with the report promised both commercial regeneration, great, and climate resilience, great, but gives no actual mechanism for resolving the conflict between them two. So what binding test will be used to ensure the seafront development does not deepen emissions, habitat loss, risk of flooding, coastal erosions?
Well, it's a good question, and as you say, I guess there is inherently a tension a little bit between any type of construction or development and environmental impact, and obviously we see that with housing as well, right? We know we've got a desperate housing crisis in the city, but we know that the demolishing of some other building and the building of houses, will release carbon and will contribute in some senses to emissions. I think largely, a lot of those decisions then end up deferred to the planning process and looking at how environmentally friendly developments are. I wouldn't say that we've got, that the board is going to set down stringent requirements on exactly how developments would need to work. I think that has to come through overall council planning policy and then the planning application process. I think overall, I would also say that actually, if we think about local visitor economy, and also as Councillor Goddard and Councillor Winder are setting out, the benefit for residents being able to visit parts of the seafront they currently don't, that is in theory potentially very good for the environment, right? Is people staying locally, walking or getting the bus down to the seafront and staying locally and being able to play and socialise and eat and drink locally. And then equally, as I said, most visitors to the city coming down on the train station and then walking down. Again, that's a low emissions form of pleasure seeking or tourism. So I think those things definitely have to be balanced in there. But I mean, look, you're right. There's always a tension between development and the environment, which we have to tease out on a case-by-case basis, and then obviously comply with the requirements of national and local planning policy in terms of emissions of buildings, etc.
It's also worth adding that the needs of climate resilience and development are often in the same place. So, it's difficult to seek investment for somewhere if it's, prone to flooding, for example. So part of the Black Rock project has been to raise the height of the sea wall there, improve the kind of the flood protection at Black Rock to make it more developable. So the two can kind of sit hand in hand, but actually take Councillor Taylor's points around. Yeah, there's also a carbon cost that we need to consider.
Thank you. Mark.
Yeah, just on the bigger picture side of it, I do have a detail, but on the bigger picture side, I think the one thing that we haven't mentioned is the barrier, Councillor Goddard mentioned about local people getting to the seafront, and I'm thinking people in Whitehawk, there's a real barrier between those areas and the seafront, which is the road itself. And I think anything that doesn't look at crossing that barrier and the traffic that looks at it. Councillor Taylor talks about the vision, the best seafront in the world, but if you look at other seafronts, they don't have that level of traffic. The seafront is there. It's not cut off from its hinterland. It's actually part of the network. If you watch cycle racing across Europe, you'll see them all finishing on the seafront, and it'll be on a grand plaza. If it's Nice or somewhere like that, it won't be cut off as we are. So I think that's something that needs to be looked at as how those are. We talked about conflicts. So there's another conflict between the movement strategy and the place crossing strategy. not coming up with an answer, but there is a thing to be resolved there. But just on the detail, I was going to mention, and we have talked about it in the Heritage, and I'm going to send Amanda my photos of the monoliths of Brighton. And actually, Councillor Shanks mentioned about maintenance. So the monoliths of these legible Brighton, you'll see one when you come out of the station, which has the sea at the top, which annoys the map purists because the sea should be at the bottom, being at the south. But all over the city, about 15, I don't know how long ago it was, 15, 20 years ago, this whole network of legible with maps, destinations on it, and it's all not all out of date, but it will be very out of date with Valley Gardens on it. All the maps there's no money to update the maps. There's graffiti over many of them. They've been hit by cars. So there's another example. In London, TfL have these, and they keep them updating them, and the map gets changed every few months, every few years anyway. When something happens, we've got a very out-of-date set of maps, set of wayfinding in there. So that it does say you can come out the station and it will say see straight ahead. But if it's covered in graffiti and stickers and gig posters and so on. So that should be something to be looked at as well. We'll hopefully be talking about it in the Heritage Report as well. Sorry, Amanda, quickly, Chair. I think Mark makes some really good points about maps, signage in the city. This would and should reside within, I would argue, the Business Growth Board. Many years ago, it started to think about signage across the city, and then nothing seemed to happen. Mark, I think it's really important. And that station to the sea, I think that's where you start to think about space, place, and how you involve people in that space and place making in a completely different way. Queen's Road is for cars, not for residents and visitors at the moment. And we need to think much more imaginatively, I would argue, about some of those issues.
Yes, agree. We have talked about it quite extensively in the Heritage Group, the wayfinding issues and different ways of doing it. Councillor Robbins.
Thanks very much, Chair. I wasn't sure if I was allowed to speak or not, but thank you for indulging me. And I've sat almost bursting there because I've heard a lot about the east of the city and Black Rock and everything else. And I think that I would have let everybody down in the west of the city if I didn't speak up and say, let's not forget that the seafront, in spite of what the map showed us, doesn't finish at Hove Lagoon, but actually goes on for a good way into Portslade. And we have a full working port there, which imports wood and timber from across the world. And the streets in Portslade reflect that. There's Denmark Road, Norway Street, all showing that heritage, that industrial heritage that is also part of our seafront. And my mum used to tell me she had 8 brothers and sisters, all born 2 years apart, because that was every time my granddad's ship come home, because he was a seaman, and they went out and signed onto a new boat and went off, and when they come home, they'd have another baby. But that's a different story. But just really to point out that, we don't end at Lagoon. There is that, and it's a starker, but it is a beauty. Anybody who stands with me and looks down Portslade Canal as the sun's setting, you see a different type of beauty and a different type of aspect, still working port. And talking of, as we were, about barriers to get into the beach, Portslade has 3 roads and a canal before you can get to the beach. So, think yourself lucky you've got one road. All right, well, that's the shout out for my neck of the woods anyway.
Thank you, Alan. Always happy to have you come and tell us about Porta Salada, as long as you don't get started on the paint. Councillor Mackie.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to concur with what Councillor Goddard was saying, that I have a heavy weight of things in my inbox which are saying, why are we not actually, as soon as people get out the train from the station, actually having an archway and directing them as to all of the beautiful points that we have in the city. And I just think that we need to actually focus attention on that, because like if you're in Barcelona, for example, and you get and you've got all these illuminated signs, you know where you're going to watch, to visit Gaudi architecture or whatever. We haven't actually cemented that in Brighton at the moment, and I think that we should. Yeah.
Thank you. Michael.
Thank you. I just want to pick up on that part about Portslade. Having lived there for about 15 years, I'm very familiar with it. And it reminds me that the whole discussion around the redevelopment of Shoreham Harbour was mostly hung up around transport along the coast to the marina and back, lack of public transport and lack of people being able to travel easily, bearing in mind that they now also have a large number of tower blocks running onto Shoreham. The number of people that will be wanting to access Brighton and Hove from that area is only going to increase.
Thank you. Any further questions or points? I think it's been a really good discussion actually on that. And are we just asked to note this one? I think we are. Yeah, so we're being asked to note the report. Do we agree to that? Thank you. Okay, so now we are going to, thanks very much to Jacob and to Max and to Alan and Birgit who all joined in. So we're now moving on to the memorials policy. So we have Councillor Allen, who is the Cabinet Member for Customer Services and the Public Realm, and Ian Baird, who is the Outdoor Events Manager, to present the memorials policy. Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Chair. I'm here to talk about the first draft of the memorials policy, and I want to stress that this is being brought to scrutiny as a first step, not as a last step. So I look forward to getting into a lot of the detail and indeed the big picture and working through any of the points that members may find of interest. And so this policy has been drafted really to bring clarity to a situation where there currently is very little. There is no single point of reference for how memorials in the public amenity spaces throughout our city, be they parks, parts of public realm, areas of estates, or indeed on the highway. There's no single point of how they are managed, established, maintained, and so that's leaving frontline operatives of the council in a difficult position about having to make decisions which they shouldn't be expected to make. So what's covered in this policy, which you'll all have had a chance to read, is plaques, public art, benches, memorial trees, memorial gardens, and temporary memorials such as flowers on lampposts and things after an RTC, a road traffic collision, things like that. So we're talking about two things at once here. We're talking about temporary memorials and those longer term ones which can last for decades or hundreds of years, as we still see around the city. If we go to the next slide. So the actual policy, when we get into it, we will require an application for those that seek to last longer than 14 days. The 14 days will be kind of the what's the word? The period of us letting it be there before we step in. And this is where I'll bring in my personal anecdote. So I had a relative who passed away at a bus stop in the city, not near anywhere where we lived. One of my family members decided to create a memorial at this bus stop. It had flowers, it had an Albion scarf, it had a Brighton of Albion flag, and it was there for years. And that actually upset other members of my family who thought, it's time to move on. Now, when is it right for an officer to get in the middle of that? And even, the family members didn't want to get involved really, so it did stay there for years. It's gone now, I think, thankfully, but this process now will say 14 days unless they go through this new process and have some due diligence and accountability through it, which I think is really important. So you can see there, it goes on to talk about how new benches and new trees will be established. So obviously, as members of this committee know, trees can be diseased. We spend a lot of money tackling elm disease and ash dieback, things like that. So going through the tree trust fund is really important to our administration. New benches should be in places where they are needed, not just where the best views are, and there are lots of benches already, or indeed where people can afford to place them. The application process itself, we would want to see detailed proposals on design, location and materials to ensure that it's compliant with our environmental standards, health and safety standards and planning considerations. We want to know funding arrangements, including ongoing maintenance. We want evidence of community support, having undertaken consultation, and we want a maintenance plan which includes a named point of contact for the memorial. If we go on to just a few more points to note to pull out from the policies. For those longer term memorials, we would want to see a 20-year wait after passing, 20-year wait of passing for commemorative memorials. And I'm going to bring up a very unsavoury example here, so please do forgive me. But after Jimmy Savile passed away, plaques went up around Scarborough and Yorkshire. Within months, they were all gone. So waiting 20 years, it doesn't even have a tombstone anymore. So waiting 20 years ensures there's that longevity and relevance to actually memorialising something. Say 14 days for flowers and roadside tributes, things like that. Some people have said 28 days, and I'd be keen to hear members' thoughts on this, as when it's 28 days, we can ensure that a funeral or a wake service will have been had, but 14 days is the current standpoint. Any unsanctioned items will be removed by city parks and the highways, as is indeed the current approach, including in cemeteries with contraband, for lack of a better word. And of course, all installations must be accessible and safe. If we go on to the next slide. So where memorials form parts of public gatherings and vigils, we want organisers to go through the safety advisory group in order to coordinate a multi-agency response with the police and other colleagues. The other thing to note there is that where there are vigils where over 100 people are expected, we always encourage the organisers to engage with our events team. If we go to the next slide, which I think is the final one. So this is the application process that succinctly talks members through, and if passed, it will talk through members of the public, the process that will be in place from now on. I think there might be one more slide, is that right, Giles? That is just the time frame, which you can read yourself. The only other thing to mention is around liaison with ward councillors, especially for quite difficult, political, divisive memorials that might appear. I think there needs to be that democratic accountability built in, and so going through ward councils, I think, is the route to do that. We obviously understand, taking a step back for a second, that this is an area that has to be approached sensitively. This is a big bureaucratic council deciding where to draw the line on when grief should end. So we're trying to approach this really sensitively, compassionately, inclusively, but in a way that is respectful to our public realm for the city as a whole. So I think this is a good starting place. and I look forward to comments members may have about it. But before I hand over, Chair, anything you want to comment on, Ian?
I think that's fine.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much. Before I call in some of the people whose hands have already gone up, can I ask, when I was looking at the slides, I was getting a bit confused between the 14-day thing and the unsanctioned items. And then I got it and realised that you are actually, I mean, I get that it's kind of more than overdue that we have this conversation, but as you say, it's a difficult conversation. And you are actually expecting people who've just had a sudden bereavement or whatever, and are those kind of people like your family members who would go and put an Albion scarf and some flowers where the bereavement happened. You're asking them to instead go on the website and find some form or other and fill it in. And I'm just thinking, is that realistic? Is that ever going to happen? Is that what people are going to think of when they see that? I'm a bit surprised by that, having not really thought about it before when I looked at the slides previously, but I don't know what you think about that. And I also want to say that for my money, 28 days would be more sensitive than 14 days as well. But you don't need to answer any of that really. I'll bring in, I saw Teresa had her hand up first. Councillor Fowler.
Yeah, we had a memorial that went up in our ward to the baby, was it Victoria? And it was really quite upsetting. Lots of people came, they put teddy bears and all sorts of things. But after a while, it just got awful. It looked awful. The flowers had died. And it just, I think we're going to have a tree. I don't think it's there yet, but I do think, you know, eventually that's taken away and a nice tree is put up. I mean, and another thing is a resident wanted a bench in the park and there was no facilities. She was just told no, she couldn't have a bench in the park or a name on a bench, which I think was really upsetting for her because I think it was a young son that had died. So that needs to be moved up. But what's in where my mum lives in Telscombe Cliffs, there's a memorial area in the park and it's really beautiful. You can go up there and sit and there's all beautiful flowers and there's the wildlife, butterflies and insects. And what they've got is like a circle and it's a post, lots of posts, all in a circle. And then you've got somebody's name on the post. And it's really quite beautiful, a really beautiful place. And I think each park in Brighton could have a memorial spot where people can just put a post with their name on it and dates, and then a chair where people can just sit and remember if that's what they want to do, because I think that's a really nice idea.
I agree. I think that sounds like a great idea. If we had more of that, maybe people wouldn't be so inclined to put things on the bus stops or whatever. But okay, next on my list.
Quickly come
Yeah,
back
sure.
on that. I know it was a comment, but I'd draw attention to our wider work in our cemeteries portfolio, and there's a lot of work undergoing around that to make it more of a reflective space, especially in some of our cemeteries which are full and have been full for a very long time. But you're saying you'd like to see that rolled out in parks more.
Yeah, this was it. It's in a park. You can see. I've just got it up on. I can't really see it very well, but it is a special place in the park where we often walk to and just sit. I mean, I've got no name there, but I just like to go and sit there sometimes when I walk the dog through the park. It's nice.
Thank you. Michael.
Sorry, Chair. Can I respond to Councillor Fowler's point? I think the tension there is there's no assumption of kind of respecting those that want to do that in a park, whereas in a cemetery there is that assumption of being sombre and respectful and more delicate to the people around you. You know, but I take your point.
Nobody's buried there. It's just posts instead of a bench, because there's not enough space for a bench in a park. I think the bench was meant to have been in Blakers Park. They've got loads of benches and there wasn't enough space for another bench. But just a circular area with some flowers, wildflowers, and posts going round with people's names on, and some maybe chairs where people could sit. You need to go to Chatworth Park to look at it, because I can't really explain it very well. It's a really nice area.
Thank you. Michael.
Thank you. I'm really glad that we've been able to open up the discussion to involve longer standing memorials, which can easily be forgotten. I'm particularly minded that we're coming up to the centenary of Peace Park out at Patcham, and the particularly rundown state that that's currently looking in. You know, it'd be great to have some attention and community involvement around what that was originally intended for.
Thank you.
I completely agree there. I often, walking around the city, I feel quite saddened that there are some very old monuments, some of which, list the councillors that were involved, on the Recreation and Grounds Committee, 1894 or whatever, that are now in a very sorry state. I was looking at the dedication fountain in Queen's Park on Saturday, and you can barely read it now, which is a great shame. If those at the time could have left 200 years worth of maintenance funding, that would have been very helpful. But there are lots of heritage assets in our city. I work on quite a few of them, for example, the Pepper Pot. Because of how many Grade 1 listed heritage assets we have in Brighton and Hove, a lot of those that are more, that are either Grade 2 or aren't listed at all, but are kind of lovely to have, and we see them as really important heritage assets, will never get to the top of the list for heritage funding, like from the National Lottery. So it's difficult to find that kind of funding, but it's definitely something we want to do.
Thank you. Mark.
Thanks. I've got two, or I want to cover quite a bit, so indulge me a bit, sorry. First of all, I think it's not really being said, but I'm assuming a lot of this has been catalysed by what happened in Palmyra Square. As a Jewish person with relatives in Israel, I think without acknowledging that memorial was incredibly meaningful to a lot of people who lost relatives, including local people living locally who had relatives killed by terrorists on that date, I think it's slightly disingenuous to not refer to this. Now, maybe it's a coincidence that it happened after that day.
Some of the photos are there.
Yes, the photos are there, but it's not mentioned it's mentioned if you know what's there. So it's a sort of hint rather than a thing that's mentioned. So I think you need to somehow, you talk about the sympathetic approach, which is right, but I think you need to recognise people's really strong feelings to commemorate an event. So suggesting a 20-year period, I think, for something like that is quite difficult. I think you need to have some form of way of differentiating between local, national and international events, and thinking about how that affects people in the city, how it could be any event that affects local people quite strongly, and they want to have a vigil. Now, that's not setting aside the need to speak to the police and the need to have it done with community safety. I completely agree with that. But I think that some sort of symbolic representation which lasts between 14 days and waiting 20 years. There should be some leeway to say maybe have a year's period for something that's authorised but semi-permanent, semi-temporary. I think would be really important, and have a different way. If there'd been a closing date, and I think if you think about it in terms of Jewish mourning, we have 7 days and then we have a year. You don't put a tombstone in until a year after the death, and at that point it's considered, then you move on. So if you had a year's period for an authorised semi-permanent, then it would be a way of having the bridge between, it's either 14 days or it's a permanent way of doing it. And I think there's a suggestion there to think about something that is in between those things. Because moving on to the other issues, I think 14 days, and what Amanda said was, I think, expecting somebody who's lost a relative. There's one at the bottom of the road near me on Freshfield Road. Somebody had a hot stack and drove into a railings. And I think expecting somebody to fill in a form and apply for it at that time is just not, it's difficult. So I think it may have been misunderstood because it seemed to be on the flow chart in that diagram that you should apply. If it's that you're told, oh, by the way, you've got 14 days, maybe you don't really want to hear that, your relatives just died. You don't want to know about that. So something a bit longer and a bit more sensitive would be sensitive. And from my professional side of things, working in transport, there has been ghost bikes, white bikes, put for people who've died in cycling collisions, cycle casualties. And it's quite divisive when those are removed, when there's a period. So I completely agree there should be a policy, but it needs to be, I think, slightly more thought out about that length, because 14 days does seem really short period to mourn effectively somebody. I understand what your relatives and the problems you had, that maybe forever is possibly too long as well, so it needs to be somewhere in between. Interestingly, I was reading the only other place I could find, I don't know if Ian's looked this up, but the only other place I could find with a similar policy was Southampton. And Southampton have a requirement that it needs a clear, I'm reading the words here, a clear and well-defined historical and conceptual relationship with the proposed location and the city. I'm not saying you automatically have to borrow from other cities, but that seems a good wording to phrase. But they have a 10-year rather than a 20-year period to think about whether it's relevant. So I think maybe just some tweaks. I completely agree with the principle, but I think some acknowledgement, and as it says in there, the sensitivity and sympathy to people who want to commemorate stuff is really, really important. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. You've put a lot of thought into this, I can tell, and I really appreciate that, and I appreciate a lot of your suggestions. I don't accept that it's disingenuous not to mention specific examples. We're here to set policy, not to go into situations which aren't present at the moment. The 20-year waiting period. We've built into the policy, it's on page 5, that there may be exceptional circumstances warranting earlier consideration, which will be evaluated case by case with community input, which I think is really important. So when I was going through this, the example I gave up was the Athena B, the ship which crashed. The anchor of that ship is now a memorial on the seafront. I don't think the council should have had to pay for storage for 20 years of a ship's anchor before we could put it on display in our public realm. So there are occasions when things can be expedited. The other example is going back over 100 years now, but it took about 5 years generally for communities to start building war memorials after the First World War. I don't think waiting 20 years when we were pretty much teetering on the Second World War would have been right for that example either. I'm reaching back into history, so indulge me, but so we have built into this policy that there are cases where that may not apply. The other point I just wanted to address was on whether there should be a midway period between 14 days and 20 years. Many of the areas of public realm where memorials pop up are in conservation areas. I can't even remember how many conservation areas we have. Councillor Cattell might know off the top of her head, but we have many. We have many listed buildings in the city, and so planning considerations are something we have to take into account, and things that need planning permission and listed building consent, and so that might be a reason why that can't be taken forward. I'll defer to Ian's judgment on that.
Yeah, that's part of this. I think the key thing here is it's about setting a framework, a clear framework we start from. The reason we're here today, ahead of this being a decision, is that the opinions in this room are really valuable. And I think there's some really useful context that's been raised there. I also think it's really important that we don't forget that we're working in public spaces, and you and I might have many a conversation about the impact of additional infrastructure or things being put into the public realm and how that can be quite impactful for different users of the spaces, certain people with sight loss or mobility issues. So we really need to make sure that this policy is fit for making sure that we maintain our public spaces in a safe and usable manner for everyone who moves through them. But I think taking on board the length of stays, that there's potentially some room for some movement on that and finding the right balance.
Thank you. Did you want to come back on that?
I just wanted to say on the planning that 28 days is the temporary planning for us. We've discussed at length. 28 days is the temporary planning permission limit, so 28 days would seem to be appropriate for the short term for the same reason.
Councillor Goddard.
I was conflicted when I first read this. Are you bureaucratising something that you shouldn't? Are bureaucracies known for their sensitivity? Are you overworking this? Are you rushing this? And I found myself shocked that I couldn't get a perspective of what other local authorities do. I've just heard about Southampton. I also felt, it's a slight side issue, but those photographs were indistinct on the PowerPoint, but I was able to recognise that perhaps 3 or 4 of them was a particular place not too far from here. I don't think you need those kind of photographs on your PowerPoint. I also take Mark's point about the sensitivity and the power of Palmyra Avenue Memorial to people. I'm kind of worried that, you know, what happens when we don't get back to people when they apply and 14 days has gone. How humane and human is this council in response at times to things that local communities want? I would warn you, not in a patronising way at all, but we must take care over this. I appreciate the spirit within which you and Ian work. Obviously I do, I've worked with you both. But I also think let's just, you know, take it carefully. I think 14 days is daft. I think 20 years is far too long. But also, is this an area that a council needs to get involved in? Do we even need this policy? That's what I mean. Are you overworking it? I just really ask some basic questions, like why? I get your public realm. I get the importance of infrastructure, Ian, of course I do, but there's something I found slightly wrong. And that's my scrutiny. I'm conflicted. I find it quite difficult to articulate. I think be careful. We're dealing with humans, and we're dealing with tragedy, and we don't all respond to a bloody council policy.
Thank you.
I'm a proud bureaucrat. Yeah. Absolutely. That's why I'm wearing a tie and you're not. So a couple of things to get into there, and I really appreciate Councillor Goddard's insight on this. Is it too bureaucratic? Well, it is solving a problem. I was saddened to see that Councillor Sykes couldn't be here today, because I know he was really looking forward to getting into this discussion, as has Councillor Sholak, as the ward councillors for Brunswick and Adelaide, in which Palmyra Square sits. I know they were put in the middle of some very difficult conversations with no clarity around what the process is, both for new memorials and those wishing to object to it, frankly. And so there is no democratic accountability at this moment. It's just who gets there first. And that's not fair. And it's equally not fair on council officers that have to try and make decisions on this. Is it fair that if you go to City Parks and get, yep, that's fine, and then someone from Transport comes along and takes it down, well then you thought you had permission, but you don't, because there's no process, there's no policy. So both everyone's in the right and everyone's in the wrong. So through this, and as I say, it's not the final step, through this we can get to a place where there is at least clarity, and that supports both the applicants who want to create a public memorial for those who want to share in grief and anguish, and it's also much fairer on staff who will be put under stress, who we have a responsibility to their well-being, as our staff and as residents in our city at the same time in many cases, for us to provide clarity for them too. That's the job we have as councillors, to make these kind of tough decisions. The other point, yes, so do we need this policy? I think we do. Anything to add, Ian? No? Perfect.
Thank you, Chair. I know that this is coming from the best possible place, and there definitely did need to be some sort of policy. I totally agree with that. And I like the idea of a safety advisory group as well, just to make sure that any monument that's put up is safe and not going to fall over onto somebody. I'm not clear who makes the decisions about this. You know, people can put in all sorts of applications, but who's going to actually make those decisions? Is it going to be just one officer in an office or two people? And does it have to go to somebody in a cabinet position? Or, you know, those aren't really answered questions. So the rules do make it seem kind of fairly restrictive, but that could be toned back a little bit. And the other suggestion I was going to make was, could there be a standing committee that came together around some of the more difficult decisions, so that people felt that there was a group like this with a kind of a set of people who were coming at it more independently, to look at those kind of issues if they became difficult. Because I think putting it on toward councillors who may have known those people who've died, and or the family, for example, that would make that decision incredibly difficult and very complicated. So I think there are probably ways that we can smooth this out a little bit and make it acceptable to everybody, really. And that's a bit more consultation, a standing committee, and not involving people who might be closely involved and find that very difficult anyway. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Winder. I like the idea of a standing committee. I'll just talk through the thinking behind ward councillors, and that is that they are elected to represent their area first and foremost, and to reflect what they think is the best for the ward. As you know, in Hanover and Elm Grove, if there was an application that was quite controversial for William Clark Park, for example, I think you, Councillor Rokins and Councillor Galvin, would know best. You then have to shoulder the responsibility of being involved in that decision making, and that's a burden we all elected to bear. But whether we branch that out into more of a committee, there are pros and cons, I can see of that already, but it's worth having a think about beyond this meeting. And I'll just bring in Ian to talk about the safety advisory group and how we'll operationalise this decision making.
Yeah, I think there's two parts here. I think just on that point around a standing committee, and I think you're right, Maureen. This is about there being the right decision makers in that group, and the suggestion here within the policy isn't that it falls upon the ward councillors, but that the ward councillors are best placed to help convene that group to get the right people in the room. And I think that's the important piece. For all its ills, bureaucracy does bring some really good systems, and things like community cohesion departments, that there are people here who have that knowledge and that influence and are able to look across communities and bring them together around difficult decisions. That's what the ward councillors can tap into, and I think it's really important that we put in place the mechanisms for that to happen, and that perhaps is where the thinness in the policy sits, is the mechanism for bringing those multi-skilled groups together. On the safety advisory group, that's specifically around the gathering of people as opposed to the safety of any specific fixed monument. I think the safety of a monument comes down to the planning piece, and that's for a planning decision around making sure that any fixed monument is safe within the public realm. The safety advisory group is a really important multi-authority function that we have to make sure that we're reading across any event that's taking place or any vigil, and just make sure that the support is there, and some review has been made of what they're planning to do as part of that vigil, and that we can support it in the right way. It's certainly not, it's very important to note the Safety Advisory Group, that the clue is in the name. It's there to advise people on how we can assist. It's not a decision maker. It can't say a vigil can't go ahead, and it's not for us within the local authority to be saying yes or no to a vigil or a protest. That's a police function, and that's for them to own. But a Safety Advisory Group can say, if you're planning to hold a bit of a vigil, here's some of the resources, or here's some of the things that we would advise you take advantage of to give you the best possible outcome.
Thank you. Councillor Meadows.
Thank you, Chair. It's been quite an interesting discussion today on this item, actually. I was thinking about the Hillsborough disaster when we're looking at a 20-year timeline for something. I don't think they'd have waited 20 years for some kind of memorial there. So perhaps 20 years is too long. There has to be some middle ground somewhere. 14 days, again, it's too tight a timescale. Even 28 days, actually, if you're grieving, is very, very tight. And I would suggest, there should be discretion applied around the circumstances on each application for those. Thank you for including ward councillors, because we do understand the sensitivities around issues. There may be bunches of flowers around a lamppost and so on, but it may be because we as ward councillors with residents have been campaigning on road safety complaints about a particular part of the road, and then an accident happened, and we would be saying, leave that a bit longer until that road part is completed, until the road works are done to ensure it doesn't happen again. That kind of thing, that's where ward councillors are really good for that. So I think, I think it's a good idea. It does formalise something that has grown up in the city around lots and lots of sometimes you'll find flowers or a tribute or something somewhere in the city at any one time in the city. So perhaps formalising it in this way is a good idea, but I think there needs to be a lot of discretion, because it does deal with people and emotions, and needs to have some respect about that. Thank you.
Very valuable insights, which I will take on board.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Shanks next.
Thank you. I do find myself agreeing with Councillor Goddard, actually, which is... I know, it's taken a long time, but we've got there. Yeah, I mean, I suppose it depends what memorial we're talking about. There was one in East Brighton Park, and I remember having, standing there and looking at that, and that's really quite nice. But, it was quite big, and eventually, I think it's gone now, but, occasionally walk up there and think. But, I mean, I suppose I'm not sure whether you're saying that people should, if they want to put flowers somewhere, that they should apply to the council to put a memorial, presumably those are fine. So the things like that, round a tree, was a photo of a lad who was killed, I don't know, he was a footballer or something. Okay, so what you're really talking about is the sort of thing we had in Palmyra Square. I mean, that's been very problematic, and I mean, Councillor Sykes unfortunately got suddenly called away, family issues, and I didn't have a chance really to ask him what his view was, but presumably he's put that to you, because that was a slightly different thing. I think, I'm not sure what we're trying to achieve apart from that, because that was very problematic. But is it likely to happen again? Or, I mean, 20 years is, yes, a long time. You can get a dead person's name on a bus really quickly. Councillor Norman, I don't know, Anne Norman was on there really quickly, wasn't she? So I mean, I don't really understand what that seems rather too long. The other thing I was not sure about was why we can't put plaques on an existing bench, because that might be cheaper for people to pay just for a plaque on a bench, you know, if we haven't got one on there. If it was their favourite bench in the park and the bench is there, I don't really understand why we wouldn't put a plaque on it. And in lots of places, when you do pay for a tree, there is a thing at the bottom of the tree which says who it's for, and I'm not really sure why we're saying we won't do that. I can see you shouldn't put ashes on trees, but, you know, it's a nice thing. If I'm going to pay for a tree for somebody, it's quite nice to have something there that says who it's for. And, you know, lots of walks I do around the place, and I think, oh, that's quite nice. So, I don't know. I think there's lots of bits in it, but let's not make it too heavy-handed, because I suppose it's what are you really talking about in terms of this memorials, apart from something like a Palmyra Square, you know, because if you're talking about somebody was killed on a bike somewhere and people leave flowers, they don't need to go out and apply to have a memorial there. That would sound incredibly heavy-handed, wouldn't it? Or in a park, you know, if they want to put it somewhere in a park. If they want it to be a permanent thing, if they want something there for a period of time, so maybe it's more about how permanent people want this to be and what they want it to be, whether they want it to be photos or... I mean, those spontaneous things with teddy bears, that was a bit odd in a way, wasn't it? Just over the top, perhaps. So people do that. That's not really what we're talking about, is it? I suppose I'm not really sure what we're talking about here, whether we're talking about a permanent thing, which ended up in Palmyra Square being quite permanent, or whether we're talking about a spontaneous thing about we'll go along and put some flowers and then eventually they'll die and have to be cleared away. So.
Thank you, Councillor Shanks. Happy to provide some clarification. So this is for memorials that will be present beyond 14 days. So flowers, you know, on the side of a road traffic accident have that 2-week leniency period where we don't really get involved. It's when it's beyond that this policy will kick in, and whether that's 14 days now or whether we push that to 28 days will be fed in by this conversation, which is really helpful. Councillor Sykes hasn't told me his insights yet, but I will be sure to reach out to him directly now that he couldn't be involved in this conversation, because his insights will, I think, be really, really valuable in going forward along this. Just remind me, was there anything I've omitted to cover? Okay. But I take your points.
Thank you. Councillor Urphy.
Sorry, like Councillor Goddard, I'm hopelessly conflicted over this. I do rather admire you for even actually trying to address this. I'm glad you sort of I'm glad you clarified the thing about the 14-day rule. I'd rather it be 28 days, or that's a bit longer, simply because as a ward councillor, I am not going to interfere with a spontaneous outburst of grief. Because certainly in Saltdean, I come from the kind of the oldest average age in the city. So I have a lot of old people being run over. We have a lot of accidents on the A259 as cyclists and things, which often end in fatalities. But worst of all, we have people jumping off the cliff and unfortunately killing themselves. So, and we have a lot, all the time, you're just seeing these flowers will appear. So that's the first thing. The second thing, at the other end of the scale, the really long-term monuments, you know, for centuries and things. Yes, we do have to understand history is dynamic. So yesterday's heroes are today's villains, so we do need to be careful. Certainly on a shorter time scale with celebrities. Quite often we'll celebrate a celebrity and then 5 years later they'll be part of Operation U Tree or whatever it's now called. So yeah, I accept that. But the thing I'm really struggling with, and I'm probably going to upset some people in this audience because I've not thought about it properly, is where we are putting memorials out to people who are the victims of conflict. Because if you think about it, conflict always involves at least two conflicting parties, where one party thinks they're a victim of a perpetrator, and the other perpetrator thinks that they're victims of the other. So basically, when things like Palmyra Square happen, I'm sorry to say, yes, I understand what the Jewish community thinks, but then there are other views on that, about how they regard, you know, the other side, which has been going on for centuries. So, and I don't want us to be referees in a conflict like that. I don't think it's our position. So either we say something like, all these people on either side are just simply victims of conflict. They are victims of human brutality against each other. We know through history, the human race has unbridled enthusiasm for brutality and killing each other for whatever reasons. We just say it's brutality and just let everybody commemorate what they want. Or we say, no, we're not going to allow that. You can memorialize your victims in your own particular area, not necessarily in public. Now, I don't know what's right, so I'm sorry if I do upset people, but the thing with conflict is there's always at least two sides to the story, and I don't feel like acting as a referee. Sorry, that's just the way I feel.
I think Mark wants to come in on that point.
Yeah, so my great-grandparents were killed in the Holocaust. One died in Theresienstadt, one died at Auschwitz. Now, there's a guy called Gunter Demnig who goes around Germany originally, but the rest of Europe and now in London, putting plaques in pavements called Stolpersteine, stumbling stones. They're about 400 millimetres square. There's one in Magdeburg to my great-grandparents. And the idea is you walk along the street and you go, oops, I didn't know such and such a family died here. There is one city in the world that's refused to put those plaques up, and that's Munich. Munich said, enough with the Nazis, enough with commemorating the war. We don't want... Munich was the home of the Nazis. So you can put a plaque up in the Jewish Community Centre where your community can commemorate it. And the whole point of this plaque was for everyone else to realise. So I don't want us to be the Munich city that says we're going to commemorate things by putting them where only those people can see. So I think I understand the risk you're saying. The memorial was not, of the people killed on October the 7th, they weren't all Jewish for a start. And it wasn't celebrating the other side. And it's certainly not, there are some people both sides, who see it as celebrating the killing. It's not, it's commemorating the deaths. And I think if there was one commemorating the deaths in Gaza, I think that would be an equally valid thing to have as well. So I think you have to be careful. I am concerned about the guidelines which say items considered by senior executives to be political, divisive and offensive will be removed immediately. And I think if you're going to have that, then a guidance for senior counsel or senior officers of what that means needs to be written down in advance, otherwise it's going to be an ad hoc definition of that thing. So, I do think we have to think very carefully about those tributes, which is why I think something that is a permanent thing is a different matter to a semi-temporary thing. I think that's the important thing.
I would say before I bring anyone else in that I'm quite concerned that we don't end up in this committee, which has no remit for this, doing exactly what Councillor Earthy was worried about, which is trying to referee one particular situation. It's not what this report is for, and it's not what we are here to discuss. So I'm just going to move on from there, hopefully. I'm glad that you both got to express your point of view, but I just want to move on from this now. I'm going to bring in the next one on my list is Councillor Fowler.
So are you saying so somebody died in a road traffic accident on the outskirts of Brighton, well, in Brighton, like Wilson's Avenue, top of Wilson's Avenue, say, and somebody is so upset their son died and they put a bunch of flowers that after 14 days you'll remove it? If that's so, I need to...
After 14 days, it is liable to be removed by street teams. The flowers would have withered by then. It will be a withered plant in plastic, tied to a lamppost. If it's still being replaced and upkept, then we want to know about it through this policy.
I don't understand that because, this guy, this has happened a few years ago. I think it's gone now, but. A man lost his son in a road traffic accident, top of Wilson's Avenue, and there was a bunch of flowers there on the lamppost, and it was renewed constantly, and I think this went on for about 10 years, and there was always a fresh bunch of flowers there. Every time you drove past there, he regularly went there and put flowers. So are you going to say to that man that he can no longer do that? I find it really traumatising, to be honest. I do, I'm sorry.
No, nowhere did I say that. I said we'd want to know about it. yeah, all we want to do is know about it, so that our staff are not put in a position where they think they're tidying up the street and actually they're traumatising one of our residents. That's exactly what we're trying to avoid.
Thank you. Councillor Goddard.
I think particularly after what we've just heard, are we bureaucratising something that we shouldn't be? That was one question I had. Are bureaucracies known for their sensitivity? And I'd argue that, yes, you've come here in the spirit of what scrutiny actually should be about, but I think the reactions that you're getting around the table should be really taken seriously by yourself, because the why is not articulated clearly enough. And Councillor Shanks has said that. Other people have said that there's different types of memorials, and I don't think the slide deck that you presented, and it may just because it's initial, is sensitive to that. The solace that I get from, we've got mutual friend in common, Councillor Nigel Jenner in Ada, when we went to plant that tree for him in Buckingham Park, the solace that I still get, and I've been back to see it, obviously, is profound. And I think the solace that people get with plaques on benches, even existing benches, I didn't understand that phrase, no plaques on existing benches, is profound. The solace that Councillor Fowler is articulating about flowers on a lamppost refreshed for 8 to 10 odd years is profound. And I think you've got to be really careful about involving the council in issues like that. And I also think that this needs reworking. The why you want to do this is really, really important. I'm still, like we are here, we're proud in our conflict about this, and I think we're actually giving you a gift as a bureaucrat that you should be taking on board in a human way, and be careful, I would say to you, about this. Some of the language that you used is not overly sensitive.
Hi, can you?
Thank you, and I appreciate the spirit of scrutiny, which is your catchphrase, Councillor Goddard. I appreciate all the insights that members have given us today. It gives us a really good launch pad on how we develop this further. What I would say is I don't think this is over bureaucratising this, because we are already embedded in all of this. We, as a council, are responsible for the maintenance of our streets, for community cohesion. We have a big job on community cohesion in the current climate, with all the flags and things like that. We have a really delicate job to do in terms of community cohesion. And currently there is no clarity. So I accept some of your points that there are ways we can lay this out, whether we make it much more clearer, what's short term, what's long term, what's going to be a statue that lasts for 400 years and what's going to be flowers that last for 2. But I think that this is a necessary policy that this council needs for the well-being of our staff and also for the clarity of residents of our city seeking to use our public realm in this way.
Thank you. I do appreciate your clarity about the reasons that we've come to this policy kind of thing, and I also appreciate the points that have been made about how careful we have to be. Councillor De Oliveira.
Thank you. I wasn't really planning to speak, but I think you're getting the feeling of the room. I think the underlying premise of this debate here is grief, really, isn't it? We talk about grief. It's a very human thing to say we're bureaucratizing grief. I don't know how many mental health experts were their colleague impact with when it comes to about talking bureaucratizing grief. So I think the sense here that I'm getting is that be careful with that.
I don't know if you can tell you how many psychologists, social workers, or people who work say, actually, we are planning to prioritize grief. What do you think about that? I think many people say be careful because grief is a very, a complex. I can define it. I'm a mental health, I don't think anyone can define it. It's change, fluctuate, go up and down, grief comes and goes, you have stages of it, and you really try to pin down and pigeonhole people's grief. Blimey, that's a task.
I don't accept that this is pigeonholing in any sense of that word. I think, I feel like I'm repeating myself, but I can't make this point enough, that this is clarity for everyone involved who want kind of ongoing memorials in our public realm, so that it's not a kind of Wild West, both for our officers and for people who want to remember loved ones out in public spaces. I mean, I also have relatives who have memorials in their own gardens. That's not what we're getting involved with. What we want to do is set up a process whereby those in our public spaces that are shared by 280,000 residents and millions of visitors can do so in a way that's clear and compassionate and sensitive.
Thank you. Councillor Cattell.
Sorry, Chair, I was wanting to follow on from Mark, but you drew a line under.
Yeah, I think that's
I just wanted to say that I from my point of view, because I went to quite a few of the things that happened, the memorial, the thing, and it wasn't about blaming another part, it wasn't about conflict. It was about paying respect to the people that died, because every Tuesday night, until the last hostage was released, or the body of the last hostage was released, the people gathered there to remember the couple that set it up. You probably know Adam and Heidi as well. And Adam lost 4 members of his family, and one of his, on October the 7th. And it wasn't about saying, we hate people from Gaza. It was, these are the people we lost, and very, very violently, and these are the people we love, and we want their names to be, held in our hearts. And now I think the memorial has it been removed? I can't remember where, is it in the BNJC? I can't remember. Yeah, so it has been moved. And they did that after after all the hostages or their bodies were brought home. So I just wanted to sort of pay respect.
Okay. I think we may have reached the end of the questions and comments. So I'm going to ask if we are happy to note the report.
Yeah.
Thank you. And in which case, thank you very much, Councillor Allen. That was a bit of a grilling, but thank you very much for the questions and the answers. Before everyone stands up, we have one more item on the agenda, which I would like to get done quite quickly, because I'd like to be out of here by 2:45. But we are having an informal discussion. I mean, all the cabinet members can all sling their hooks, but and the officers are off the hook. But we wanted to have just an initial discussion on what our next task and finish group topic might be. And we have a few suggestions that we haven't put in the papers or anything, but they've come up previously as notices of motion that you might remember, or 2 of them have. We had a cooperative housing notice of motion, and we had a winter/nighttime economy notice of motion. And also I've had another suggestion just through email, that public realm as a wider topic might be a good subject to do. So those are the 3 ideas that have been on the table. I very much like the cooperative housing notice of motion that went through full council, and the winter nighttime economy one. I think both of them are excellent ideas for task and finish groups, possibly and very timely for this city. Possibly cooperative housing the most timely, given that there is currently, I think, legislation being considered which is relevant. So I don't know, what do other committee members think? Sorry? You can? Go on.
Just one thing on the public space, I think that's quite important, but I'm just concerned, not concerned, just questioning which committees they fit into, because wouldn't the cooperative housing, doesn't that come under people rather than place? Or just...
No.
Okay.
No, because it's about actually expanding the kind
sites,
of sites and the laws around, you know.
That's why I was confused about the...
Yeah.
You're looking for, it's an open discussion, open discussion. You're looking for ideas of what should be our next, your scrutiny committee's next task on this group.
Yes, indeed. We could throw it open, if people are tired, we could say, please email in the next week.
Yeah, I think email is better.
You write down the ideas while you're emailing, but I'd rather like the winter nighttime recovery one because it'll come in time for next week.
Sorry, can people use mics because if anyone's watching on podcast, they won't be able to hear members. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Can we just hear some ideas and some feedback on what those 3 suggestions are and if there are any others?
Our climate rep, Les Gumpy, has suggested, well, I don't know, again, this fits into both. It was climate education and climate resilience, or education on climate resilience. He does work with that already. So he has asked me to suggest that as a topic. Educating for climate change, I suppose, would be the best phrase.
Educating by the way, I'd like to change, because it's educating. I think that's people.
Yeah, exactly. That's where I meant about. And by the way, I'd like to do, if we do nighttime economy, do we get to do night site visits?
Winter and nighttime economy, not just nighttime. Councillor Meadows.
I'd like to go for the winter and nighttime economy because I think it's something that we need to be looking at, and it will give us the summer in order to prepare and set that up.
Okay, Mark, sorry, yeah.
I'd like to propose green spaces and community support for them. So little individual parks which are supported by local communities, friends of that kind of thing.
I think, Councillor Winder, do we already have a kind of parks working group? I mean, it's not the same as the task and finish group, but...
Yeah, we do, because Alan leads on that, and there are regular meetings with other councillors anyway, but that doesn't stop us having a meeting about that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a bad idea for a future working group, actually, a kind of pocket parks and all of that, and community spaces, so thank you for that. All of these, anything we don't end up using for the next task and finish group will end up on our long list anyway, won't it, from where we've had previous discussions, so, you know, so that's good.
It wasn't one of the tensions of the licensing discussion, was that it's not something that we can immediately affect. I found that slightly frustrating. I think a number of us did, that we've got to wait for... we've got to wait for this piece of legislation, got to wait for that piece of jigsaw to work. So I mean, shouldn't we be looking at things that we can directly affect in terms of like 5 policy changes that the council could make? Like, number 1, not bureaucratising grief. Number 2, letting everybody have park benches and flowers in 28 days. You know, things like this that we can actually affect.
I mean, I think realistically, any subject that we take a deep dive into is going to have aspects that the council doesn't have full power over, because that's the way the local government as opposed to central government works, isn't it? There's always a tension. So it's a kind of trade-off between, with the short-term lets, there were recommendations that this council could do something about, although all of these things, the wheels always grind quite slowly because it's about the city plan and planning changes and all of that. So it always takes longer than you want it to take. But there's also the side that is lobbying the government for change as well. And I think that would be the same with any of the ideas that are on the table here. So, I mean, one of the reasons I thought both the cooperative housing suggestion and the winter and nighttime economy suggestion might be really good ones to do, is because the winter and nighttime economy one is one that will be quite concerned with things that this council could do. And the cooperative housing one, there's a lot this council can do, but also there is current legislation, I understand, that the government, so we kind of would be pushing at an open door with some of the changes that we could maybe get this council involved in ahead of other councils, if you see what I mean. So that because the government is already legislating to help cooperative housing become a much bigger thing in this country, as it is in most other European countries. And part of the whole kind of housing crisis solving thing, that it's like in Zurich, for example, 20% of all residents live in cooperative housing, which is extraordinary. Whereas here it's seen as a really small niche thing. So, yeah.
Thank you. I think that the cooperative housing issue is a moving feast because we are having to be responsive to how legislation is changing the environment, and we need to be on that. So I think that would be good, but also the nighttime economy, because it is so fundamental to one of the essences of Brighton and Hove as a city. So I just am equivalating. I'm thinking, I'm not quite sure which one that I would actually go for, but I think both have importance.
Thank you. Councillor Earthy.
So I hadn't thought about this either, but that's probably my habit today. Just an idea for task and finish. Is there any mileage at all, or is it in our remit to resurrect the Brighton Metro project from about 25 years ago, to actually kind of address at a strategic level transport within the city and what we're trying to do, rather than doing all the kind of piecemeal things we are at the moment?
So, say that again, Brighton?
Everyone's shocked for the face.
It's like, sorry? Okay.
Yeah. Hang on,
So about 25 years ago, because I'm that old, I can remember, there was a Brighton Metro project looking at the ways of what we can do in the city to improve local transport. And there were a whole lot of discussions. Obviously, it wasn't feasible to build undergrounds or various other schemes. In the end, we came up with a network of ex-buses and bus lanes. That kind of fell by the wayside. So what it turned into was what we've got today, which is random ex-services and a few scattered things. So, and it never really worked, and the bus company never really supported it. So I'm just wondering if it's worth, if I remit, going back and just starting again, especially with all the discussions we've had about routes and things.
I think that sounds like an incredibly good idea, actually, much as I'm not so keen on transport things. But I don't think it's one to decide on. I think it's too big a thing to decide on right now when we've got other good ideas that are already fleshed out and on the table. So I'm going to suggest that one goes on our list for the next time we're having this conversation, because I think it's a really good idea for 6 months' time or whatever. Mark?
Yeah, well, that's a mayoral. That will become a Sussex mayoral responsibility.
It might well be.
There's no might about it. It will be a mayoral. It is a mayoral, Sussex mayoral responsibility. True. Strategic transport, that is explicitly. But one of the things I did suggest to you was that we have another session on the combined authority, which starts next week on Sussex and Brighton combined authority. Starts on Monday, whatever, the 1st of April. That's right. Irrespective of there being a mayor. So there are some things that the authority can do before the mayor happens. Councillor Taylor's gone, but there's some authorities that body can do. And there are some things they can't do until the mayor's here. I don't know if strategic transport is something that has to wait till the mayor's elected, or it can start from next week or not. But that is a mayoral thing. So the way we would scrutinise that is by scrutinising what the mayor does, not by doing it ourselves.
Sorry, I understand that there may be a mayor, but the mayor is in charge of the whole area, whereas I'm talking about Brighton Metro. the mayor probably couldn't give a damn what happens, whether 1X goes or doesn't go or whatever.
Yeah, it is.
And that's right, at that level of detail.
Yeah, the combined county authority will have overall, yeah, they are right. Okay, so I'm going to bring this to a close now because there's not complete consensus, but I do think that we seem to like both of the two existing ideas, the cooperative housing and the winter and nighttime economy. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to email you all over the next couple of days with the members of the committee with the notices of motion attached, so that you can remind yourselves of exactly what the final notice of motion as passed said, and then ask you for what you think out of those, that short list of two that I think we've arrived at. And we will keep the other ideas for the future. Thank you. Oh, I haven't got that one. I'm going to bring the meeting to a close. Thank you all.